Give me liberty or give me death. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Ask not what your country can do for you.
77 years ago,
America was built on courage, on imagination. The American flag is the most recognized symbol of freedom and democracy in the world.
Small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed.
Now, those words are so familiar, we've almost stopped hearing them. We don't process their meaning, we only glance over them. Almost. I want you to read those words again, not as a recitation, not as something you learned in the 8th grade and filed away, but as a proposition, a serious philosophical claim about the nature of human beings and the proper structure of human governance. A claim so radical that when it was written down in the summer of 1776, there was not a single nation on earth organized around those ideals. And today, with the exception of the US, there still aren't. You see, the British had a constitution of sorts, unwritten, evolving, and powerful. The French had a king. The Prussians had Frederick the Great. Every significant political entity in the Western world was organized around the concentration of authority, in a crown, in a court, or in a church. And here we had a committee of provincial lawyers, planters, merchants, and scholars meeting in a rented hall in Philadelphia, declaring that government itself derives all of its authority from the consent of those who it governs. That rights are not granted by rulers, they are inherited by persons. Natural rights that presuppose government, axiomatic truths that have no crown, no parliament, and thus no standing to revoke any of it. Now, this was not an original idea, and the founders would have been the first to tell you. These were deeply educated men who read widely and argued from evidence. John Locke's second treatise of government, with its insistence on inherent rights to life, liberty, and property that no government may legitimately override, had been circulating in the colonies for decades. And behind Locke stood Cicero, who argued 2 millennia earlier for natural law. The principle that rights are so deeply embedded in human nature that they precede and outlast any government. Government does not grant these rights. Government merely acknowledges them. However, they do not originate from it and thus cannot be restricted. What was original, what was genuinely audacious, was the decision to act on these ideas, to actually build something with these ideas sitting at the base. Thomas Jefferson was 33 years old when he sat down to compose the Declaration of Independence. He later said he was not trying to be original. He was trying to give expression to the American mind. He took 17 days, he borrowed language from the Virginia Declaration of Rights, George Mason's assertion of life, liberty, and the enjoyment of property, but then he made one substitution, a substitution that I think matters most. He replaced property with the pursuit of happiness. And that substitution is worth mulling over. Property matters. The founders understood perfectly well that property was inextricably linked to the material foundation of liberty. But Jefferson reached for something deeper. The pursuit of happiness, not its guarantee, not its deliverance by some benevolent government, the right to pursue it, the freedom to chase your own definition of a well-lived life, on your own terms, through your own choices, and through your own efforts. This was, in other words, the free market of ideas applied to the human condition itself. Now here is something the textbooks tend to gloss over, and I think it's worth knowing. The Declaration itself was not signed on July 4th. On July 2nd, the Second Continental Congress voted to adopt independence. John Adams was so moved that he wrote his wife Abigail that July 2nd would be remembered as the great day of American celebration, marked by pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations. He was right in spirit, but wrong on the date. July 4th, the day Congress formally adopted Jefferson's text, is what history remembered. Most delegates signed on August 2nd. Several signed later. 2 never signed at all. John Dickinson and Robert Livingston did not sign. And remember what it meant for those who did sign. They had committed treason against the crown, and their punishment would be death if the war was lost. There is, of course, another lesser-known detail worth carrying with you. Written upside down on the back of the original parchment is the note, Original Declaration of Independence dated 4 July 1776. No one knows who wrote it or when. During the Revolutionary War years, the document was frequently rolled up for transport. It was kept in motion, kept hidden, and protected as the armies moved. The founding documents and its authors were literally fugitives for years, carried across a young country that did not know if it would survive. The ideas, of course, outlasted the danger they were carried through. There is a phrase that gets used loosely in the discussions of free expression, the marketplace of ideas. But I think the founders understood it more deeply than the phrase suggests. What they were building was not simply a nation with free speech protections. They were designing a system that assumed as a foundational premise that human beings given access to information and the freedom to reason from it will tend toward better conclusions than when information is controlled and being coerced. They believed genuinely, with philosophical conviction, that the best test of any idea was not authority but argument, not rank but evidence. The outcomes of ideas were paramount over their purported virtues. James Madison articulated this most rigorously in Federalist No. 10, one of the 85 essays written between October 1787 and May 1788 to persuade New Yorkers to ratify the Constitution. Madison's argument was this: in a large republic, the diversity of interests and opinions would prevent any singular faction from gaining tyrannical control. This diversity, in other words, was protective. Disagreement was the mechanism of liberty. John Adams captured something essential when he described the American Revolution, not as a series of battles, but as a radical change in principles, opinions, sentiments, and the affections of the people. The military conflict was downstream of an intellectual event. The revolution first happened in the minds of men who read, argued, wrote, and persuaded, and then it happened on the ground. Ideas like friendship, of course, are easy in peacetime. The winter of 1776 tested whether these ideas and personalities could survive contact with reality. By December of that year, Washington's army had been pushed out of New York, driven across New Jersey, and encamped on Pennsylvania's side of the Delaware River. Cold, depleted, and demoralized, the enlistments of most of the men remaining were expiring at year's end. The cause seemed, by any military assessment, to be lost. On December 19, 1776, a printer in Philadelphia published a short pamphlet that began with a line that has not lost its force in 250 years. These are the times that try men's souls. Thomas Paine had written Common Sense earlier that year, a 47-page argument for the independence that sold by some estimates as many as 500,000 copies in a country of 3 million people. Now, in the depths of the worst moment of the war, Paine wrote again, his American crisis was not philosophy, it was a reckoning. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in times of crisis shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of men and women. Washington ordered those words to be read by his troops on the night of December 24, 1776, before they crossed the Delaware and struck the Hessian encampment at Trenton. This pre-dawn assault turned the tide of the war. Words, ideas, conviction, and then action. Winning the war was not the end of the experiment. It was, if anything, the beginning of the hardest part. By 1786, the 13 newly independent states were fracturing. The Articles of Confederation had created a union so weak that it could not levy taxes, enforce its own laws, or compel states to honor financial obligations. In western Massachusetts, farmers unable to pay their debts had taken up arms against the government in Shays' Rebellion. The republic that men had died to create was threatening to collapse into 13 squabbling sovereignties. In the summer of 1787, 55 delegates gathered in Philadelphia. They gathered in the same hall where the Declaration had been signed, and what they were trying to do was what most of the world expected was slightly impossible: create a workable national government from scratch. They met for nearly 4 months behind closed doors. They argued, they threatened to walk out, but they kept talking. What emerged after all of it was 4 pages of parchment, the first written constitution for any nation in the history of the world. On the final day, September 17, 1787, Benjamin Franklin rose to speak. He was 81 years old. In too much pain to deliver his own remarks, he handed them to James Wilson to read aloud. Franklin said he did not entirely approve of the Constitution, but he expected he never would. But after a lifetime of watching how men reason and argue and err, he had arrived at a different kind of confidence. The older I grow, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgment and pay more respect to the judgment of others. He asked every member still holding objections to doubt a little of his own infallibility and sign. What emerged after all of it was 4 pages of parchment. Now, this understanding shaped even their conception of rights themselves. Many of the Federalists opposed a Bill of Rights, not because they opposed liberty, but because they had feared the enumeration of the rights themselves could become dangerous. Alexander Hamilton argued in Federalist number 84 that listing specific rights might imply that the government possessed authority over all things not expressly protected. Rights, in their view, did not flow from government. Government merely recognized rights that already existed by nature and by providence. James Madison later acknowledged the necessity of amendments, but sought to preserve the principle that what became the Ninth Amendment, the enumeration of certain rights, shall not be construed, deny, or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, this is an important point, the absence of written protection did not mean the absence of a right. The people possess liberties beyond parchment, beyond statute, and beyond temporary authority over any state. 39 delegates signed, 3 refused. But in all of its beauty, even the 3 refusals were proof that the system was working. In September 1796, after 2 terms as president, Washington published his farewell address in the Philadelphia newspaper. Not delivered as a speech, which is a telling detail in of itself. He was writing to the American people, not at them. He was writing about the future as much as the president. He warned with an urgency that still reads fresh about the 2 threats he believed could destroy the Republic, the spirit of faction and foreign entanglement. On faction, he was unflinching. Political parties, what he called the baneful effects of the spirit of the party, he saw as a mechanism by which ambition and self-interest would dress themselves in the language of public good, and then use that disguise to hollow out the institutions of self-governance. He wrote, "The name of the American which belongs to you, in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism, more than any other appellation derived from local discriminations." He was asking the country to be bigger than its divisions, to understand that the American identity, the experiment in self-governance, the bet on the individual, the free market of ideas, in the final analysis, was worth more than any faction's temporary advantage. The question that occupied Madison, Hamilton, Adams, and Jefferson, the question that in some ways defined the entire founding generation, was whether a republic of free individuals could actually hold it together. History had not given encouraging examples. What they believed, and what 2.5 centuries now supports, is that the answer lay in the structure of the system itself, in the dispersion of power, in the rule of law consistently applied, in protecting the individual rights it made possible for a person to build a life without asking permission. Franklin, leaving the Constitutional Convention, was reportedly asked by a woman on the street, what kind of government had the convention given the people? A republic, he said, if you can keep it. Those 5 words are a founding resolve, not a guarantee, a challenge, a daily obligation to the people who came before and the people who will come after. In less than 250 years, the nation forged in that Philadelphia hall became the world's largest economy, a decisive factor in 2 world wars, the first country to put a human on the moon, and the source of more freely shared knowledge, innovation, and individual freedom than any other civilization that preceded it. None of it was inevitable. All of it was chosen by people who read the terrain of the moment clearly, prepared themselves for the difficulty ahead, and did not flinch when the cost became real. That's the founding resolve, and it's the most American thing there is. The republic Franklin dared us to keep is still standing.